Bring in Billy Embody from Go 247. Billy, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, guys. How are you?
We're doing good. Not even going to attempt to bury the lead here because the chat's going crazy, and even if it wasn't, this would be where we were starting first, and that's with Sage Ryan, the safety from Lafayette. From Lafayette Christian, he has announced that he will announce on Saturday his commitment, and you, along with a number of others, Shea Dixon included, on Go 247, are now predicting that he will go to Alabama. So the question is, intense breeding ground for LSU recruits down in Lafayette, and his ties to the Falcons. Why do you believe Sage Ryan is going to Alabama?
I think this is a recruitment that, for Sage, when you talk with him, and this dates back to when he blew up at the Nike opening regional combine back in 2018 even, where he's just mature. I mean, he's really mature beyond his years. He takes everything into account when making decisions. He does his research. He's always been very complimentary of any program that's recruited him and given them a chance. And I think on LSU's side, you have the family ties. You have, obviously, Kevin Falk, who's his cousin, who's the running backs coach, has been recruiting him. Trev Falk is his uncle, who played at LSU, of course, played for Nick Saban, coincidentally. And then you have Corey Raymond, who recruits defense backs as well as probably anybody in the country. And those were the two main recruiters on him. And for a while, it was just, if there's any prospect that you add all those things up and you say, wow, that sure seems like an LSU lock, an LSU type of player, it'd be Sage Ryan. And position of need, early playing time. He's probably a day one starter if he goes to LSU. And, I just think they faded in his recruitment. I think Alabama just was so relentless. Nick Saban was really, really involved in his recruitment. Pete Golding did a really nice job recruiting him. And, kind of out in the Acadiana area last cycle, Alabama's right there for Keyshawn Butte, too. And I think that they just kind of picked up where they left off recruiting Sage. And, sometimes I think sometimes these prospects just get to a point where they're okay with their decision to potentially leave Louisiana and play college football elsewhere. And the way Alabama recruited him, they just checked all the boxes. I mean, I think his family's on board with it. His immediate family, I guess I should say. They just did a really nice job, and all the buzz, especially in the last probably 48 hours, has been on Bama for sure. And it's been growing over the last 2 weeks. So that's kind of how we got to this point.
Billy, you understand that when you say that Alabama was relentless and LSU was fading, you realize how hard that is for an LSU fan to wrap their head around that Alabama, that what you're saying essentially is that Alabama outworked LSU to get a kid out of Lafayette?
Yeah, and it sounds obviously crazy, right? But I don't think recruiting, especially during the pandemic, is all about phone calls, text messages, every day checking in, hey, how are you? I think it's about being creative. And I just think Bama, and I've heard similar things on Clemson and Ohio State, have just done a really good job being creative in recruiting high-end prospects. And I'm not saying LSU forgot how to recruit. They've got a top 5 class. I don't think, and as bad as this miss would be for LSU, just with all the optics around it, this isn't a situation where, LSU is going to completely fall off the wagon recruiting. That's just not, I don't think, something that's going to happen. It's just kind of a perfect storm where, like I said, the optics will end up being so bad on it. But, sometimes it was almost for the last few months that you kind of felt like, okay, Bama and Clemson were trying to flip Sage Ryan from LSU just because of how confident people were on LSU side of things. A lot of people around him were saying, certainly that he was listening to Bama and Clemson, but, until you believe it with a prospect like that, or until you see it with a prospect like that, can you really believe it that he wouldn't stay in state? And I just think Bama just did a tremendous job in their messaging and all those things. And it just, at this point, it seems like it's all adding up to Alabama for sure.
Now, I know, Billy, we could sit here and we could talk the entire interview on Sage Ryan because he is a 5-star guy out of the state of Louisiana, but there's other 5-star players in the state of Louisiana that have not yet committed to his school. Of course, we're talking about Maason Smith, the 5-star out of Houma. We're talking about, 4-star prospect Brian Thomas. What's the latest you're hearing there with those prospects?
Yeah, I think the big thing with Brian Thomas right now is LSU just has to hang in there. I think right now they've trended away after Brian Thomas's recruitment kind of reminded me of Jacqueline Roy's last cycle, where over the summer it really seemed like the people were pegging him to LSU, and there was a lot of people around him and just around Walker and everything like that saw him as an end of the summer commitment to LSU, and he is dragging it out. And right now, if he had to commit, I highly doubt it'd be to LSU. But with him wanting to drag it out, that's kind of a bright side for LSU because he's not set a commitment date. I don't think he's anywhere close to making an announcement. I think right now he's certainly trending away from LSU, but there's a lot of time for them to catch up in that one, and I think you'll see a push. I think maybe the Sage Ryan situation in recruitment is a wake-up call for LSU in a way. And like I said, they've got a top 5 class. They're doing a good job. But, whenever something like that happens, it makes you circle the wagons a little bit and reassess, I think. With Maason Smith, Alabama and Georgia are certainly pressing there. The thing about Maason, though, is he's been borderline recruiting for LSU, and he's another prospect. He's going to complement all the schools he looks at, really goes in depth, all of those things. But the good thing for LSU is there's a lot of positivity, I would say, around Maason Smith, while now also noting that you can expect the unexpected when a prospect like Sage Ryan goes, or should, I would think at this point, ends up going to Alabama. So Maason Smith, I think, is the one right now that we're most confident on in terms of ending up at LSU. He's talked with Corey Foreman about being a package deal, and Maason Smith cut Southern Cal out of that, which means it's really Georgia or LSU that Corey Foreman and Maason Smith could be a package deal at. And I'm not sold on that yet, but that's what they've been talking about. So I think LSU's still in a good spot for Maason Smith. LSU's going to land their fair share of elite talent out of Louisiana. I don't think they're going to come up snake eyes at this point. It's not looking great on Brian Thomas right now, but he's a while away from a decision, as is Maason Smith. We'll see how this impacts Maason Smith and Brian Thomas, because Sage Ryan's a big name in Louisiana. He was at Tiger Turnout. He's been at a ton of home games, as has Maason Smith. And Maason Smith was a part of the organizing crew for Tiger Turnout. So it's a weird week in the state of Louisiana for LSU, but I don't think it's time to sound the alarms and blow the thing up because Sage Ryan is trending elsewhere and looks like he's going to end up elsewhere.
No, Sage Ryan is one player, but if it's Ryan and Thomas and Smith, if you get down the road and you understand where the trepidation comes from LSU, it's those years where you say, well, you're not going to come up snake eyes in Louisiana. No, not ever. It's the years where you go, well, they got everybody but one or two or three guys, but those are the one or two or three guys that are the most important one or two or three guys. That's where the nervousness, I think, comes in, and everybody's gun shy in this 2020 environment anyway. So you understand where the nervousness comes from, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And look, I mean, if they were to come up snake eyes, I mean, it's a situation where I don't think you make a complete staff overhaul or anything like that, or fire Ed Ogeron, but you've got to really look in the mirror and say, okay, where's this thing headed? Because, it, like before 2019, the gap was it was there between LSU and Alabama, and Joe Burrow covered up a lot of it. A lot of the players they had on the roster covered up a lot of that gap in 2019, obviously. But now as you look ahead and we're 3 weeks away from LSU, Alabama, that game will be very interesting. And I think one thing to note too is I don't think it's lost on Nick Saban what was said after last year's game either. And LSU better be ready to play when Alabama comes to town, or they're going to pour it on like I think really Nick Saban wants to.
I'm certain that it did, and this is still a top 5 class. Okay, so yeah. I don't want to that the sky is falling or anything like that. All right, let me ask you about Apu Ika. What's your read on him putting himself in a transfer portal?
Yeah, I think that's now, as with the 4-3, it's a little bit tougher of a fit. I think that's my first impression. I'm just a little, I guess, surprised that just 2 years in, and his role has gone from, being somebody that was so talked up and I think he certainly has to get himself in a little bit better shape. I think this is not just him feeling like he's being pushed out or anything like that. He's got some things that he's got to do to be better just for his own future. But as a 365-pound nose tackle, that's not necessarily a fit with what LSU wants to do with this attacking 4-3 defense. But they're going to miss him in run support. I think that's the first thing that jumps out to me. I think he probably should have had a little bit bigger of a role this year, at least in the rotation. But maybe this opens the door for guys like Jacqueline Roy, and if Jacoby and Giller gets healthy and some of these other guys step in, because, I think that's where the future is on the defensive line. I'm not so sure it was Apu Ika, and, maybe that was a conversation that he and the staff had, and so he opted to go ahead and enter the transfer portal now, which is a little surprising considering LSU probably needs a little bit of help in run defense against Tank Bixby and Auburn this weekend.
Billy, before we let you go, I definitely want to mention an offer that LSU's put out there to Jack Bech, a receiver from St. Thomas More. He's committed to Vanderbilt, 6'2", 215 pounds. And if you have watched high school football in South Louisiana over the last couple of years, you know how dominant Jack Bech truly is. Obviously, he's had some uncles that have played at LSU. It's a lineage deal there. I know he's committed to Vanderbilt. I know he's only a 3-star, and people only want the 5 stars. But I can tell you, just being a guy who maybe got an offer that typically wouldn't, being a 2-star guy myself, I'm glad to see LSU took the time, watched the tape, and offered this guy, Jack Bech, because he might only have 3 stars next to his name, but I haven't seen a better player in the state of Louisiana on the field this year.
He's been dominant, and it certainly helps that he's teammates and best friends with Walker Howard, LSU's 2022 commit. But, yeah, Jack has been outstanding, and he's kind of been building towards this. I went and saw him this summer shortly before Walker committed, and you can tell he put in a lot of work in the weight room. He didn't spend quarantine, just doing push-ups or, going on runs. He was in a weight room and going to work, and you're seeing that, and you're seeing it in the rest of his offers too. I mean, Mississippi State, Texas, TCU. He's somebody that's got that versatility that I think works out well in today's kind of modern offense and what LSU wants to do as well. I'm interested to see where he would ultimately end up. I think a tight end spot is a good spot for him while being able to be flexed out. He's been dominant, and I think LSU is certainly the school to watch the most for him at this point. But I don't think he's done adding offers either. I'm interested to see how he takes this recruitment. But I do have pretty positive vibes that he can end up at LSU. And like you said, I mean, the production, his size, he's starting to really show out with the offers on that front as well. So he's a stock up guy, and he's a really good offer. I mean, just like Matthew Langlois, I think both of those guys, offering those guys and getting one on board already was really smart.
Hey, real quick, follow up. Where do you see Jack playing at the collegiate level? Because we mentioned he's 215 pounds. I mean, this could be a guy that you could use, I think, in multiple situations.
Yeah, I'm not ready to compare him to Eric Gilbert. He's a generational athlete and talent at the tight end position, but that versatility in terms of being able to move him around, create some matchup issues, I think, with linebackers. That's where I see him kind of an off the line tight end. He's a willing blocker. He's an able blocker as well in the run game from what I've seen on his tape, and he wants to do it, and I think that's part of it. But I do see him more of the hybrid tight end position, and I think if you had him and somebody like Eric Gilbert on the field at the same time, it'd be fun to watch.
Billy Embody, go 247. Appreciate your time, and we'll talk with you again real soon.
Sounds good. Brighter days ahead, guys.
Thanks a lot. We appreciate it, Billy.